Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Author Talk Book Nook. I am so privileged to be here today with Ash Bishop, debut author of the beautiful, very funny sci-fi fiction book, Intergalactic Exterminators Incorporated. Thank you so much for being with me today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I appreciate you having me, Jordan. I am a science fiction writer. This is my debut novel, though. It comes out September 6th. I'm not just a science fiction writer, I suppose. I've got a second book coming out in the summer of 2023 called The Horoscope Writer, which is a mystery. So I guess you could say I'm a multi-genre author. It wasn't on purpose. I just really like them both genres a lot and tend to dabble in both genres, and this is how it worked out.
I love that. Yeah. Jack of all trades. And
Sure.
Whereabouts are you located?
I'm in San Diego, California, West Coast. Yeah.
Fantastic. So your novel that's coming out, the Intergalactic Exterminators, Inc., tell us a little bit what that's about.
Sure. So it's about a young man who's kind of drifting around. He doesn't know what he wants to do with his life, even though he's in his late 20s. And he is feeling like he's kind of let people down. And I suppose it's true that he has. He doesn't have any close connections. His family, who he loves, doesn't see him very much. And we learn that his grandfather has been terminally ill, and Russ kind of arrives to town too late. His grandfather's died, and he's there. And to kind of make up for not being there, he decides he's going to help his grandma, who has been, dealing with the illness, all the sort of complications of the illness by herself. He decides he's going to help her by putting her business back together. Now, her business happens to be a bookstore in town, and so it's already in trouble just because independent bookstores don't have an easy life, I guess. And so he's got double the weight on his shoulders. But it gets even weirder because it wasn't just a bookstore. They sell novelties and oddities. And he finds in the back of the bookstore a stone that he doesn't recognize. And the stone is very unusual. And so he begins to ask around town to see if anyone can help him figure out what it is. And a lot of science fiction adventures ensue.
Yeah, and I really love that we do get that 20-year-old who is, I don't know what I'm doing with my life. And it's like, you really get the sense of he feels like he needs to have all the answers. But in your mid-20s, you don't. I've only just recently exited my mid-20s, and I'd like to say once you leave them, you find all the answers too, but maybe the next book could be about his 30s.
Sure. Well, yeah, I also didn't want to, I study literature quite a bit, and so I'm real familiar with the heroic journey and the sort of notion that, there's a chosen one, and he's marked, or he or she's marked from birth for greatness, and all these things kind of happen to propel him to his destiny, like the scar on Harry Potter's forehead, the boy who lived or whatever. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to have my hero be normal and flawed and kind of maybe even a little behind the curve as far as his contemporaries are probably done with college and starting their internships or whatever, and he's just a little lost.
Yeah. And maybe he finds himself along the way, but yeah.
Sure enough.
He's such a relatable character, and I love too that he does put a lot on himself because he seems to have this sense of the expectations of not just where he thinks he should be, but where he thinks he needs to be for others, and also where others think he should be. So it's kind of fitting that he then gets thrown into this otherworld experience where everything is turned on its head, and he has to kind of find his feet very quickly in
Right.
Not just the crazy world we live in, but many crazy worlds.
That's right. And it's high risk. These sort of internal forces are pushing him toward helping others, but it's going to come possibly at a great risk or even a greater sacrifice.
Definitely, yeah. And so what was your inspiration for this novel?
That's a good question. It's hard to pinpoint exactly what. I knew that I wanted to do, so I really enjoyed Andrew Sapkowski's Witcher series. But I really enjoyed the first one, which is a series of, which is Geralt going on a series of jobs. And I liked that idea of this kind of blue collar worker just making a living, not really like being that respected for his work. I'd read a Vertigo DC comic book called The Exterminators about maybe 10 years ago that had kind of stuck with me. And I was thinking, well, how do I put The Witcher monster hunting together with exterminators and then put them in space? And I didn't really have to do anything else. That was the answer. I just did that. And my thinking was that so it's hard to identify what's a monster these days. We have a pretty enlightened culture, and what someone thinks is a monster, someone else may think, no, I'm just doing my best. I'm not a monster, you're a monster. And so I got to thinking, well, what would really define a monster? And that would be something that doesn't fit within its ecosystem. Its habits are so destructive that it's going to destroy the world, or at least the ecosystem, if it's left alone. And with space travel, it's more common for this to happen. If you think of Ridley Scott's Alien, the alien was just doing its thing, but unfortunately it was in this ecosystem where it had to lay its babies into the stomachs of humans.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it's fine for the alien, not so fine for the humans. But also, if you have to do that to have babies, you're going to run out of humans eventually. You're going to destroy the ecosystem. The balance is not there. So anyway, my exterminators, they're just blue collar workers, but they get called in when an ecosystem is out of balance, when a creature has kind of invaded that will, left unchecked, will destroy the environment around it. Actually, I don't know if you ever watch The Simpsons, but there's that scene when Bart takes his frog to Hawaii and it like destroys Hawaii.
Yeah, we were watching the rainforest die.
Exactly. It's kind of like that on a huge science fiction scale. Yeah, they're there to hunt Bart's frog.
But yeah, there you go. It's basically just a big old story about Bart's frog. But it's such a good message too, because you're right, having to define like good and evil and make it believable and make us not kind of roll our eyes, almost like, well, I mean, he's just doing his best, like you say. Right. Far better to then just show that it's not that in its own habitat or its own planet it would be a problem. It's that it's been moved. Or I liked too, there was a bit of carelessness of others that then led to a species being introduced where it shouldn't have been introduced. So it's kind of like you've created your own monster,
Right. Yeah. That's the thinking. And we're such an enlightened society, which I really appreciate, but that puts an extra burden on writers, because now we either have to be like vastly open-minded and understand that everyone has a mommy and a daddy, or find new ways to create drama. And science fiction fortunately facilitates that, because a simple technology like space travel or stargates will create a bunch of problems. Even in an enlightened society, it'll create a bunch of problems, and sometimes those problems have to be fixed.
Yeah, and who better to do it than down on their luck ragtag crew of exterminators?
Exactly.
Which actually, there are a lot of characters in this story, not just Russ, our main character, who's, like we said, kind of a lost mid-20s, no real stable job human. But there are a lot of other characters throughout the galaxy who are down on their luck. And what role would you say wealth or money or richness versus poverty has in your story?
Oh, a lot. Yeah, I wanted to make the job really dangerous. Well, I love the underdog. I'm a sports fan, and my love of the underdog means I'm constantly disappointed because the underdog generally is just going to lose the game. But rooting for the underdog is one of my favorite things, and so I wanted to make all the characters kind of down on their luck. And I figured if this was a dangerous job paid for by sort of disappearing government subsidies, it just wouldn't be for the highly successful. They wouldn't be interested in it. And so I thought the job would naturally attract folks down on their luck. And unfortunately, because it's so dangerous, they're somewhat disposable too. So it all kind of fit together. This notion that it wasn't a very appealing job, it was very dangerous. Who would end up, being forced to take it? It would be people that didn't have an option. And that's how wealth mattered. There's actually a race in my book. Only one character appears as that race. They're called Divians. And they're sort of the founding race of the Intergalactic Charter. And they're known for being very fair and honest and good, but they're kind of being corrupted by their position of power. And so we don't run into them much in the first book, but they're becoming a bigger factor in the second book. So wealth and privilege, I guess we've seen the poor people. We're going to get to see the rich people pretty soon.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that'll be fantastic to see the other side of the coin, because we did get almost a message about the real life ramifications of privatization of service, but also of what's the word when you give all the jobs to robots?
Mechanization.
Mechanization. Yeah, I was so surprised reading this book about space that I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah, we need to think about the people whose jobs are being taken by these machines.
Oh my gosh. Well, yeah, we couldn't be more real for us, right? I when I go to the grocery store, I let the robot check me out instead of the person, and it's happening everywhere around us. And so it was a fun thing to do to kind of superimpose it into this more advanced world, which has a more advanced version of the same problem.
Mm-hmm. Where they can make full-on exterminators that are very disposable and not have to maybe pay life insurance.
Right, or build toilets or do anything, that humans require.
Exactly. Yeah. And so Intergalactic Exterminators Inc., I want to say the full thing each time because it is a tongue twister. It's full of so many incredibly detailed alien species. So what kind of research went into your creating these different species?
Oh, interesting. Well, they're all kind of known creature based. In other words, Tyranno is basically a huge bird, like a tropical bird, 6 feet tall. And I had a lot of trouble. I was born in the 70s. I'm a little older than you. So for me, I kept imagining Big Bird from Sesame Street in my head.
That's who I imagined.
Which kind of, threw off the seriousness of the character otherwise. But since they're all based on real sort of evolutionary tracks, it kind of determined what the environment of their planet was, how they evolved. So you've got the southern blurn, who are water, amphibious, although they prefer water, but they can be on land as long as they're constantly drinking water. You've got the Tinoch, who are lizard people essentially, and that was one of my favorites. They don't show up on the heat index because they're cold-blooded. They sleep on heated rocks at night. So the aliens were really fun to write, and I would hope they're original, but they're also not original. Everything in the world is just familiar. It's new and it's interesting, but it's also familiar. Being poor and working a bad job for the government and all these things, being considered a disposable worker. That's a familiar impulse. It's not, you don't have to go to space to get that experience. And so the aliens are the same kind of thing. They seem very different. At the same time, they're kind of not. They're kind of based on the creatures that we ourselves interact with regularly.
Well, and it made it feel so real that there was so much logic behind those choices. It wasn't just, oh yes, very tall, thin, bright purple spotted blood. Sure. There was so much logic behind it that you're like, oh, of course, because it's a water planet. They need to be able to swim and breathe in water.
Right.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool.
One of my favorites is I can't even say the name. I just so I didn't really think about this very carefully, but
That's
when
for the audiobook narrator to worry about.
yes, that's what I was going to say. So so I just put a bunch of sort of vowels and consonants together playfully, partially playing on this notion that when we read, we're not actually correctly pronouncing anything. You know, like when I was a kid reading Driz to Duerden, you know, the fantasy hero, I read it as Drizzit, and then my friends came over and said, no, it's Drizzed. And I was like, how do you know? You know, it's just there on the page. And so there's kind of this personal thing that we do where we invent the sounds of the word that we otherwise can't recognize. Well, I played with that by making this really crazy long word, but then I realized there was going to be an audiobook reader, and then I was going to be reading it out loud, and I was going to have to, you know, actually have a pronunciation. So I pronounce it, I think, Ray Renee. But anyway, it's a simian-based evolution, but their world is much tougher than ours, and so are they. You know, they're bigger, they're stronger, more muscle mass, more body hair. I describe the character Kindred as looking like a professional wrestler, and he kind of does. You know, he looks human, but he also doesn't look human, just like professional wrestlers. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Well, and also, I mean, it's just however it's written down. So that's probably, you know, in that world, how you pronounce Ray Renee when you write it down.
That's right. That's right. So it's all phonetics.
Exactly. Yeah. And so what message do you hope that your readers will take away from your novel?
Well, it isn't really message heavy. I mean, it's a reflection of our own world. And so it's hard to ignore sort of, it's hard not to draw conclusions if you want to, if you're the type to read about, you know, mechanization and think, oh, you know, we've got to stop this, or to read about privatization of municipal jobs and think, you know, well, there's a danger to this. I mean, I think you're in Canada, right? So you guys have just a very different attitude toward where tax money goes. It's easy.
Or even the healthcare. That was a huge thing too.
Yeah, of course.
Healthcare for all.
Right. And and there's a character whose dad's dying, and they just can't afford to take care of him, and that's part of why she has to take the job. So anyway, yeah, there's plenty, I think, baked in there. But at the same time, you know, the world, there's so many things we've been going through as humans with COVID and political unrest and just all this stuff. I also wanted to just write a escapist novel, something that would be really fun and that people would enjoy, and they could go on this fantastic journey. And maybe they'll learn something from it. Maybe they'll draw a conclusion and have an opinion reinforced or challenged. But ultimately, I hope what they do is have a good time. So that's the ultimate goal.
Oh, and I love that. And I know we were talking a bit before I hit the record button, but the thing that I really loved about this novel is it was fantastical. There were different worlds, there were different creatures and planets, and the issues stayed human and the humor was universal. So it was just this really beautiful kind of, I don't know, connected feeling of, you know, poor Russ, he gets shipped into who knows where. You couldn't chart him on a star map, and yet he's meeting these creatures who, like you say, are also dealing with financial difficulties. It just looks a little different because, you know, they have rock for skin instead of normal skin. So right. Yeah, I really loved how even though it was set in this crazy, fantastical environment, we still had this big heart in the characters. And like I said, it's very funny.
Well, thank you for the compliment. There was a scene that I had to cut out where they buy lunch from a food truck, and they pay less for their lunch, but before the box will unlock, they have to watch a commercial. And I and I thought, you know, it's fun to sort of make fun of our own culture at the same time as kind of create a fantastical version of it. Anyway.
Yeah,
hopefully I'll get that in the sequel. Yeah.
But you know what? Now we have documented evidence that might be a thing. So 20 years down the line, even 2 years down the line, if we have to open our burger
yeah.
boxes with a commercial.
Heck
It came here first.
I actually regret mentioning it. Someone will surely get on that. Yeah, I love, Philip K. Dick. I love, I like George Orwell. I like the guys that got a lot of the stuff right about the future. So I'd love to be, even slightly in that company.
Incredible. And what is something that you really nerd out about that other people might not pick up on in your book? So maybe it's like a character's name or just some quirky thing that you've added in.
Interesting. I don't know if I have an answer to this. I can't think of anything. I am a huge nerd, and so the book is a amalgam of many years, decades of experiencing all kinds of nerdy stuff. So, for example, I didn't realize this when I was writing it, but the characters all wear jumpsuits because they're blue collar workers. But I realized after I read it, my own work, that this was Ghostbusters. I mean, I saw Ghostbusters probably 100 times when I was a kid, and here they are wearing their uniforms. They're going to work and they're coming back covered in slime, and they're the city's coming to shut them down because they just can't afford to run the operation according to code. And I didn't know it at the time, but all those influences, they just they climb on your back, or they climb into your brain, and they never let you go. And when they come out in your own artistic creations, you don't always see them until they're in place. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that. A lot. My sister read the book, and she grew up with me and also saw Ghostbusters 100 times, and she's like, oh yeah, I recognized a lot of that. and that's just how it happens. It gets into your system, and the stuff you love stays there, and then it regurgitates, and it's in some brand new interesting form.
I love that. Yeah, well, I mean, it's like you are what you eat, we are what we read.
That's right.
we write what we read.
That's right. No, that's absolutely true.
And so my favorite character was the Chrome Man. He came out of nowhere. I don't want to give too much away for people who are going to be reading your book, because everyone should, but basically it's a AI that's been reprogrammed to kind of just be able to make up its own mind from all of the books and the movies that it's been reading and inspired to read, because it's kept in the back room of a bookshop.
Sure.
But what book would you make sure he never reads and learns from?
So Russ is a bad parent, because he didn't
There's
limit.
no censorship.
Yeah, there's no censorship at all, and that caused he names him Applebum. That caused the Chrome Man to learn wildly, and he's reading V for Vendetta. He's reading the Anarchist Cookbook. He's reading Sun Tzu's Ancient Art of War. He's doing all of these. He's reading all these things that may not be the best thing for him, since he's essentially a newborn, and he's got to gather kind of experience at the same time as he gathers knowledge, and all he's doing is gathering knowledge, and so the experience has to come from the things he does. I would say this is kind of a cop-out, but I would say the one thing I would not let him do is have access to the internet.
Smart.
Because first of all, it would fry his circuits. He wouldn't be able to make sense of the completely opposite facts. The way in which one thing is true in one place and the exact opposite is true somewhere else. Humans are struggling with that right now. And an AI would also struggle, and I wouldn't want him getting anywhere near the sort of darker parts of the internet, because that would be him learning things about humans that may, confuse him or even make him not like us as much.
Yeah, we definitely want to keep him on our side.
We do.
What advice would you give any aspiring authors who want to write a space comedy, or, as you mentioned, you're writing and releasing a mystery?
Sure. So this is a fun question. I submitted this book to a well-known agent, sort of the second to last agent I ever submitted it to, and she came back and she said, I don't want it. And I said, oh, could you tell me, what you didn't like about it? You just try and keep that connection going, make yourself a human instead of a number. And she said, I think I would just start over completely. And I was like, totally crushed. And yeah, the very next agent that I heard from, who I'd submitted to already, offered to represent it. And she said, I loved it. I haven't loved anything like this in a long time. And I think it's amazing. And so my advice to young authors are, one, be true to yourself. Your readers are out there. There are sort of things that are more popular than other things. If you want to sell a bunch, you may have to pander to the marketplace a little bit and do kind of what they want to read. On the other hand, if there's something you really want to write, your readers are out there, and the only way to be defeated is to quit. And the reason that you quit is because you take the rejections to heart. And it's a really subjective medium. There's a lot of people out there with a lot of different tastes. And I would say just don't quit, because that's the only way to stop you. They can't force you to stop querying. They can ignore you. Yeah, yeah, exactly. They can ignore you, but that's totally in your power to just keep going. And sometimes when it seems darkest, when someone tells you to give up, to start over completely, the next person's going to tell you, I love this. And then, a little while later, you're going to be doing podcasts talking about your debut novel.
Yeah, I cannot believe that. Yeah, but it's so true, because I mean, not everyone's going to like everything.
Yeah.
But it's something that if you truly believe in it, you're the only one who can stop it.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Which means no one can stop you, really. Yeah. Unless you want to. Yeah. So the one thing that was really interesting was that I learned about that experience. Popular stuff has a formula, and people that are successful and sell a lot are looking for that formula. And if you step outside of that formula, they're going to think, well, you're doing something wrong. What you're doing is something original or different. It's certainly not wrong, but they're going to think of it as wrong because they're only looking specifically for these successful structures. And so, yeah, my books is just a little bit different than normal books, or I guess you would say formula books. And so for some people, they're not going to be able to connect with that. But for others, hopefully, they'll find it fresh, new, and interesting.
Yeah. It made me think of when Thor Ragnarok came out. After all of those more and more cookie cutter superhero movies, we have this out of left field kind of campy comedy, and it was incredible. Yeah.
Well,
the Ragnarok.
So that was inspired by Flash Gordon, which was a movie I used to watch every year on my birthday with my little pizza that my parents would make for me. And so there's no doubt that that's in my book too. You can just see the sort of connection between the camp and the goofiness of Flash Gordon, and how amazing it still is. Amazing. You still love the experience. You're still out there on the journey. You're still rooting for the good guys. But at the same time, you feel like this comfort because nothing is too serious. And Thor, Ragnarok did that so well. And it was a fun ride. Yeah, for sure.
Well, and that's where your book really does, like I said before, have that beautiful line of comedy that is legitimately funny, not just tailored funny. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Alrighty. So then your novel comes out on the 6th of September this year, 2022. Where can we find it?
You can find it pretty much anywhere. The distribution it's a major distributor, so it's going to Walmart, it's going to Target, it's going to Amazon and Barnes & Noble and all these places. Now, I want to say that part of the theme of the novel is to save a independent bookstore. So if at all possible, buy it at an independent bookstore, because that would be, one, thematically appropriate, and two, sort of the morally right thing to do. So it's available all sorts of places, but if you can get it at a local independent bookstore, that's my recommendation. I'm actually signing it at the Mysterious Galaxy in San Diego on the 7th, September 7th. So if anyone's in San Diego, come on by. The bookstore in the novel is called the Mysterious Universe. So it's a little homage to my neighborhood bookstore. And so that's my recommendation. Buy it from somebody that doesn't necessarily have .com at the end of their name.
That's very good point. And if they don't have it on the shelf, then make sure you get them to order it in, because we can do that.
That's right. And that helps me.
Perfect. Yeah. And where can we follow your news updates? Where can we find you online?
Sure. So I've got all the social medias. I'm not naturally a social media type person. I think that readers are kind of turned inward. That's why we like to read. We find something there that the regular world isn't offering us. And so I'm not a natural at social media, but I'm on all of them. The best place is probably my website, which is ash-bishop.com. But you can also find me on Facebook. My middle initial is L. And so my Twitter handle, all that, is at @AshLBishop. And so that's probably another place you can find me. My website has an email link, so you can write me a message if you want. I'll probably write back. And that's it. Those are the best places.
Fantastic. And I'll put all the information in the little description below. So my last question for you is, what we already know that there's a book coming out next year, but what are your upcoming projects?
Sure. So I've got the mystery novel coming out in summer of 2023. It's called The Horoscope Writer. It's about a guy who, again, he's kind of down on his luck. He gets a job at a news online and physical newspaper, writing horoscopes, but he starts receiving the horoscopes actually from an anonymous source via email, and there's a little line in there that says, publish these and only one comes true, ignore these and they all come true. And the horoscopes are not great predictions. They're grisly crimes and terrible things happening. And so he doesn't take it seriously, and then of course the next day he starts to see these things occurring throughout the city, and he's not sure if it's his imagination. You know how horoscopes work. They put the idea in your head and then it feels like it's coming true. Or if he's stumbled onto something, really sinister. So anyway, it's a fun book about sort of the elusive nature of truth these days, especially in the media. And I'm not politicizing that for one side or the other. I'm just saying it for everybody. I'm also working on the sequel to Intergalactic Exterminators, writing it now. It's probably going to focus on intergalactic refuse control, people who pick up space trash. But Russ is still the main character, so it's going to continue the narrative of the previous one. But there's no set date for that yet. I got to finish writing it and then work on the next steps.
Perfect. So yeah, follow you along on your website or any of your social media pieces, and then we can find out when that's coming out, because your tone throughout that book is so funny. And when you said it's about intergalactic refuse, I'm like, but he's gonna make it interesting and he's gonna make it colorful and he's gonna make me cry about it. I just know it.
There's nothing less interesting than trash collectors. No offense to trash collectors, from a narrative standpoint. But when you put them in space and you make them to find things in the wreckage that lead to great mysteries, you can go anywhere you want with it.
Exactly. Oh, I love that. Well, thank you so much for taking this time to speak with me and talk about your novel and about the wonderful characters and story that you've created.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity and for the lovely interview.